When Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI were arrested by the Revolutionaries, few openly admitted to being a friend of the king or queen, except for one of Marie Antoinette's most loyal companions. The Princesse de Lamballe, Marie-Therese Louise of Savoy, was not only a close confidant of the French queen, but would remain so steadfast it would result in her horrific death. Marie-Therese Louise of Savoy was born on the 8th of September 1749 in Turin at the Palazzo Carignano. The palace was created for the princes of Carignano, of which the fourth one was her father, Louis Victor. Her mother was Landgravine Christine of Hesse-Rheinfels-Rotenburg, a German princess of the blood. Little is known of Marie-Therese's childhood, but silence usually means a contented and uneventful one. She was one of 8 children, herself the 5th daughter. From what is known of the Carignano household, it was fairly typical of most noble families. Marie-Therese would have been educated in the qualities deemed most important for a noble wife, as she would one day become, including learning an instrument, dancing, and probably at least one other language. When Marie-Therese was 17 years old, she was married by proxy to Louis Alexandre de Bourbon-Penthièvre, the Prince de Lamballe, and a great-grandson of Louis XIV. It was seen as a very suitable match, as both Marie-Therese and Louis Alexandre were from a royal bloodline, and it allowed an alliance between the House of Savoy and the House of Bourbon. Her brother stood in for her absent husband in the royal chapel of her father's palace, and was followed by a bedding ceremony, in which her brother removed 1 shoe and 1 stocking before lying next to her on a bed, both otherwise clothed in front of onlookers, and a wedding feast afterwards. This ensured, even if Marie-Therese's new husband died before she ever laid eyes on him, she would be entitled to her widow's finances. On the 24th of January, she went over the bridge of Beauvoisin between Savoy and France, leaving behind her Italian retinue and life, and becoming the French Princesse de Lamballe. She was escorted to her new husband and father-in-law, to whom she would become very close in later years, and adopted the French version of her name. Just a few days later, as was customary, she was presented at the French court of Versailles. All reports state that she was favourably received. Everyone was delighted with her sweet and merry personality. At first her marriage was happy, as both parties were attracted to one another from the moment they laid eyes on one another. However, the Prince de Lamballe's father, Louis de Bourbon, Duc de Penthièvre, had been desperate to arrange the marriage in order to stem his son's appetites for loose women and raucous behaviour. Predictably, marriage did not stop this part of Louis Alexandre's personality, and it wasn't long before he was unfaithful to his new bride, having affairs with 2 comedy actresses, and even attempting to give some of his wife's diamonds as a gift to one of them. Marie-Therese was heartbroken when she found out, but she was comforted by her father-in-law, who was the opposite of his son in many ways and saw her as his own daughter. Just a year later, in 1768, Marie-Therese would become a young widow. Having run off from his household once more to pursue a life of drink, women and debauchery, Louis Alexandre was brought home by his father to the Château de Lucienne. He was suffering from a venereal disease, and despite being nursed by his sister and still loving wife, he died on the 6th of May. Marie-Therese was now a widow and inherited a fortune which made her a wealthy woman in her own right. However, it was her initial wish to enter a convent and become a nun, and she only changed her mind about this when her father-in-law begged her to stay as his daughter. Marie-Therese agreed to stay, instead helping with the Duc de Penthièvre's charitable projects in Rambouillet. He would become known because of this as the King of the Poor, and Marie-Therese earned the nickname the Angel of Penthièvre. Marie-Thérèse's most well-known role would come in 1770, when the new Dauphine, Marie Antoinette, arrived at Versailles. As Dowager Princess de Lamballe, Marie-Thérèse was expected to be part of royal ceremonies and to greet the new future Queen of France. During the next year in 1771, her father-in-law began to entertain more, and as a result of being his hostess, Marie-Thérèse became more involved in court life, including attending balls held in the name of the Dauphine. Marie Antoinette was reportedly enchanted by Marie-Thérèse and showed her more attention than the others, which didn't fail to escape the gossips of Versailles. Cousins of Marie-Thérèse married into Marie Antoinette's family, and it wasn't long before the Dauphine came to treat Marie-Thérèse as a close relation. The Empress Maria Theresa, Marie Antoinette's mother, disliked the friendship, as she believed royalty should not form close or intimate relationships, and that having favourites caused problems. However, Marie-Thérèse was known by all for having an amiable and sweet personality, unlikely to create political or courtly problems, and was a princess of the blood. This made her acceptable if such a companion had to be chosen. Marie Antoinette was charmed by her new friend, and Marie-Thérèse became her closest confidant. After Marie Antoinette's young husband Louis XVI had ascended to the throne, also making her Queen of France, she raised the station of her friend. On the 18th of September 1775, Marie Antoinette made Marie-Thérèse the Superintendent of the Queen's household, the highest possible rank for a lady-in-waiting. This position meant Marie-Thérèse was now in charge of overseeing the Queen's orders, staff, and schedule over all other ladies-in-waiting. But the very giving of this position created tension. The post had been vacant for over 30 years, mostly because it was seen as unnecessary, expensive, and gave too much power to the holder. This was compounded when the Queen also gave two of Marie-Thérèse's brothers lucrative posts. Marie-Thérèse was of sufficient rank, but was seen as too young. She would also gain the outrageously huge salary of around 1.2 million livres. Marie-Thérèse was asked, in the circumstances of the country, if she would give up at least part of this huge sum, but she refused, bursting into tears and stating she would rather have all the honours that came with her rank or retire from court. Marie Antoinette instead offered to pay the salary, leading to whispers of Marie-Thérèse being a greedy court favourite. Marie-Thérèse was also given to fainting spells and convulsions, sometimes remaining unconscious for hours at a time, which gave way to rumours that these were fake and used to bring on sympathy. In other words, whatever good reputation Marie-Thérèse had built for herself by helping charitable works was being eroded in her behaviour and perceived favouritism at Versailles. Marie-Thérèse had many charms. She was described as charming and sincere, unlikely to engage in the intrigues of Versailles, and was liked by nearly all at court. However, she was also reclusive by nature and preferred to spend time with the Queen in small groups of company, rather than in the high society balls and amusements that Marie Antoinette was coming to enjoy as she settled into her role as Queen. It wasn't long before Marie-Thérèse would be pushed aside for a new favourite, Yolande de Polastron, the Duchesse de Polignac. Yolande was beautiful, outgoing and sociable, and she expressed her opinion to the Queen that the Princesse de Lamballe was rather boring. In return, Marie-Thérèse considered the Duchesse de Polignac to be a bad influence on Marie Antoinette and distanced herself from Yolande. By 1776, Marie Antoinette was spending more time with her new favourite, and Marie-Thérèse appeared less and less at court. The Queen quarrelled more with the Princesse de Lamballe, who always seemed to be in the wrong, reported by Ambassador Mercy to the Empress Maria Theresa. When Marie Antoinette decided to arrange amateur theatre productions at her personal property, the Petit Trianon, Yolande managed to convince the Queen to refuse Marie-Thérése's admission to them. It must have been a humiliating experience for Marie-Thérèse, who was still superintendent to the Queen's household. As such, she still had to hold balls in the Queen's honour, greet foreign royal guests with the Queen, and participate in ceremonies, such as for the birth of the royal children. By the mid-1780s, Marie-Thèrese's health had worsened to the point she was no longer able to perform her duties. In 1787, she travelled to England, advised by her doctors to take the waters in Bath. Despite the medical nature of her visit, rumours abounded that it was actually a secret diplomatic mission on behalf of the Queen. Charles Alexandre de Colonne, an exiled minister of France, was about to publish his memoirs, and some thought Marie-Thérèse was going to ask him to omit details about the Queen, but in fact he was not in England at the time. But this still showed the story that was growing around Marie Antoinette and those deemed close to her, even if the rumours were foundless. After her return to France, Marie-Thérèse found that the Queen's friendship with the Duchesse de Polignac had soured, and once again became Marie Antoinette's closest confidant. Her health had recovered to the point Marie-Thérèse could once again join in with court life, but events outside Versailles were brewing as well. She would have been present in 1789 to attend the ceremonies around the opening of the Estates General, an important point in the build-up to the Revolution. Propaganda surrounding the King and Queen was gaining speed as well, and several pamphlets a week were spilled onto the streets of Paris. Marie-Thérèse was reserved and quiet by nature, and regarded by many at court as something of a prude, but that didn't prevent the production of pamphlets accusing the Princesse de Lamballe from being a lover of Marie Antoinette. This tapped not only into the growing hatred of the wealth divide and for the upper classes, but also into the 18th century suspicion of homosexuality. The main purpose was actually to undermine the Queen's image, but it must have been horrible for Marie-Thérèse to be shown in this way. In July 1789, when the French Revolution finally broke with the storming of the Bastille, Marie-Thérèse was away in Switzerland, and when she returned, she stayed in the country to nurse the Duc de Penthièvre, and so was not present for the Women's March on Versailles on the 5th of October. 2 days later, Marie-Thérèse left to join the royal family in the Tuileries Palace, resuming her duties as before, sharing the apartments of the Pavillon de Flore with Madame Elizabeth, the king's sister. Marie-Thérèse settled fairly permanently. It would prove to be a brave decision, but was in keeping with her loyalty and steadfastness. Life in the Tuileries Palace retained some sense of normality. King Louis XVI still held public viewings of his rising and going to bed, and Marie Antoinette still held card parties and dined publicly with the king, whilst also attending mass. Foreign envoys were still admitted and had to be entertained. Throughout all of this, Madame Thérèse was by her queen's side. She had never really enjoyed holding lavish parties or balls, but now she threw herself into them. She understood that gaining support of loyal nobles would be the key to helping Marie Antoinette's cause. Her salon became the meeting place for the Queen and many important members of the National Constituent Assembly, as well as where Marie Antoinette reportedly met with Mirabeau. In light of the Revolution, Marie-Thérèse also had a new role to take on, that of checking for loyalty amongst the royal household. Madame Campan, Marie Antoinette's lady's maid, recalled how she was questioned by the Princesse de Lamballe after rumours she had been receiving revolutionaries in her rooms. Through a network of spies, Marie-Thérèse cleared Madame Campan, then questioning the lady's maid on other members of the household once she knew she could be trusted. Many members of the court fled France, including the one-time favourite of the Queen, the Duchesse de Polignac. With so few members of the royal entourage remaining, slander against them intensified, amongst them Marie-Thérèse. In June 1791, the royal family attempted to flee France in the unsuccessful flight to Varennes. Marie-Therese was not aware of it at first, probably to protect her from being questioned afterwards if it had been successful. But the night before, Marie Antoinette simply bade her good night and advised her to spend a few days in the country for her health. After departing the next day for her villa in Passy, the Princesse de Lamballe received a note from the Queen, informing her of the escape plan and asking her to meet them in Brussels. Obtaining letters of introduction, Marie-Therese set out at once, first sailing to Dover in England and travelling through the Netherlands until she reached Brussels, meeting with Count Axel von Fersen, the Queen's close friend who was behind the details of the plan. Of course, she then knew the escape hadn't worked. In doubt for some time whether she would be more used to the Queen in or out of France, Marie-Therese's mind was made up for her in October 1791. This was when the new provisions of the Constitution began, and Marie Antoinette was told to put her household in order and release any courtiers not in her service. The Queen therefore wrote the Princesse de Lamballe a formal letter asking her to either return to service or resign. While we do not know the contents of this letter, it apparently was enough to convince Marie-Therese her place was by Marie Antoinette's side, and she made up her mind to return to Paris. She was quoted as saying, "I must live and die with her." This also led to Marie-Therese writing her will, although there is some dispute whether she wrote it in Britain or while in the Netherlands. In either case, she understood there was a good chance she would die in the Queen's service. On her return to the Tuileries Palace, Marie-Therese wrote to nobles who had already fled France, asking them to return in the Queen's name. She worked hard at retaining loyal courtiers around the royal family. When the demonstration of the 20th of June 1792 broke out, Marie-Therese was with the Queen at the Tuileries. The demonstration was the Parisian people's last attempt at a somewhat peaceful resolution to persuade Louis XVI to abandon his current policies. The people of Paris burst in as a mob, intending to petition the king in his apartments and obtain decrees and ministers they deemed fit. But they also passed by the room in which Marie Antoinette was with her children. The Queen, fearing for her husband, cried out, "My place is by the king's side!" But Marie-Therese calmed her friend and replied, "No, no, madame, your place is with your children." A table was pulled before the Queen and her two children, and she was protectively surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting, the children's governess, and a few noblemen. They stood by her side as the mob passed through for several hours, spitting and hurling insults at Marie Antoinette as they went. According to a witness, Marie-Therese stood by the Queen's side through the whole ordeal, showing great bravery as she placed herself between the mob and the royal family. Her only thoughts seemed to be with keeping Marie Antoinette, the young Dauphin Louis, and his sister, also named Marie-Therese, all safe, without giving her own safety a second thought. The Princesse de Lamballe would remain in the Queen's service even during the much more violent attack on the Tuileries Palace on the 10th of August, 1792. The palace was stormed by armed revolutionaries, and Marie-Therese, along with the children's governess Madame de Tourzel, took refuge with the royal family in the Legislative Assembly. This attack would prompt France to abolish the monarchy just a few weeks later. While staying at the Legislative Assembly, Marie-Therese grew ill and had to be sent away to the Feuillante convent to get better. Marie Antoinette told her loyal friend not to return, but as soon as her health improved, Marie-Therese once again returned to the royal family, travelling with them to the Temple, a prison tower that once stood in Paris. It was clear she had made her choice about living or dying. On the 19th of August, it was to be the last time Marie-Therese would ever see Marie Antoinette or her family. The Princesse de Lamballe, along with Madame de Tourzel and her daughter Pauline de Tourzel, was separated from the royal family and taken to La Force prison, where the 3 women shared a cell. In September, the prison was attacked several times by mobs, and those accused would be placed before hastily assembled tribunals run by the common people. Each prisoner was questioned before ultimately being allowed to go free or being condemned to death. Death came in the form of being thrown out to a yard where a mob of men, women and children were waiting to kill the condemned. The staff of the prison didn't agree with this and often allowed prisoners to escape, especially women. Pauline de Tourzel managed to escape, but her mother and Marie Therese were too famous to get out safely. However, the royal governess Madame de Tourzel, along with most of the other women who had been members of the royal household, were freed from all charges. Sadly, the Princesse de Lamballe, her profile too well known, the slander against her forming an opinion in the minds of many that didn't really exist, would be the exception. On the 3rd of September 1792, Marie-Therese and Madame de Tourzel were brought out into a courtyard before a people's tribunal. She had spent several weeks in a small, dank cell, unknowing of her fate, and it must have been terrifying to face the accusatory people waiting for them outside. The roars of the crowd outside the courtyard were loud and angry, and the experience must have been nightmarish. The Princesse de Lamballe was quickly asked her name and her employment before being questioned as to whether she knew of court plots on the 10th of August. Upon replying that she did not, Marie-Therese was then asked to swear to a very specific oath, that of liberty and equality, but also to swear hatred to the king and queen. Reportedly, her words in response were, "Readily to the former, but I cannot to the latter. It is not in my heart." There were some men who were sent from her father-in-law present, and they apparently whispered to her to say the oath, even if she didn't really mean it. But Marie-Therese instead simply added out loud, "I have nothing more to say. It is indifferent to me if I die a little earlier or later. I have made the sacrifice of my life." It was the end of her swift interrogation. The judge announced that Madame was to be taken away, meaning death. The Princesse de Lamballe was marched out of the courtyard by 2 sans-culottes and thrown out into the yard beyond, where a murderous self-proclaimed executioner mob awaited her. The yard was already filled with the bloodied corpses of other prisoners who had met the same fate, and the men sent from her father-in-law shouted out for mercy, but were soon silenced when the mob shouted for their deaths also. Apparently, the Princesse de Lamballe stood silent for a moment, a small woman dressed in white, before she was struck with a pike to the head and fell to the ground. The crowd then set upon her, stabbing her viciously until she bled to death. There are many variations on her death, especially later from pro-royalist supporters criticising the regime, in which Marie-Therese was stripped naked and raped, or had her breasts cut off, her body cut apart and her entrails dragged out. However, there is no historical proof for these tales of horror, and were more likely used as propaganda against the murderers when on trial in later years. A clerk who later had to deal with the remains of Marie-Therese's body noted only that her pockets had items in, suggesting she was still fully clothed, and that she was without a head. This part was true, and furthers the grisly death of the Princesse de Lamballe. Her head was removed from her body and mounted on a pike, then paraded through the streets, while her body was dragged behind as the crowd screamed, "La Lamballe! La Lamballe!" There were several witnesses to this, and one purchased a lock of her hair which was later given to her father-in-law. Marie-Therese's head was then shown beneath Marie Antoinette's window at the Temple prison. The wife of one of the prison officials saw the head and screamed. Thinking the scream came from Marie Antoinette herself, the crowd laughed and jeered, asking the Queen to come and kiss the lips of her favourite. The prison officials kept the royal family away from the windows, and Marie Antoinette apparently fainted upon hearing whose head was outside. One of the Duc de Penthièvre's men managed to get hold of the Princesse de Lamballe's head, interring it in a nearby cemetery. Her body, while recovered by the authorities, was not buried in a known place and is still unknown today. Marie-Thérèse, the Princesse de Lamballe, may have been on the wrong side of history in siding with the French royal family, but that is her only fault. She appears to have been a charitable, gentle person who was loyal to her friends to the very end and brave enough to face her fate. There is no question that while the grievances of the French people had been ignored for too long, and their suffering should have been helped a lot earlier, Marie-Thérèse and her fellow prisoners did not deserve the horrifying death that awaited them. Her character lived on in the memoirs of those who had known her, and while not a prominent part of the French Revolution, she would be remembered as another whose blood was spilt for being close to Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI in the building of the new republic. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any new documentaries.